When Iran attacked us, what happened? Well, SDI kicked in, and we enabled us to retaliate, wipe out everything. We have full freedom of movement in the sky over there. It's just ridiculous. The superiority we wield in this war should make very, very clear to us that if any of our enemies are looking to get nuclear weapons, we need to stop them now. We need to beat their asses when they're bringing a knife to a gunfight. So, and that's exactly what we did. We were able to not only defend against the attack successfully, but we were able then to retaliate. So not only did they lose one, we gained two, okay? But that doesn't necessarily end the problem here. And this is where mimetic theory shows the way out of this. Of course, this is good. This is a good strategy. I'm not attributing all this just to mimetic theory, but the mimeticists see that peace must, more importantly, the escalation to the extremes needs to be interrupted before nuclear holocaust. But this isn't that difficult to discover on your own, because I'm actually basically going to give you my rendition, first of all, of Jean-Pierre Dupuy's decision tree, but then I've added what Trump has done to it. This book was written in 2023, and so I think that this is probably the handbook of what we are doing in Iran today. And I actually started reading this book as we were beginning our strikes upon the 3 nuclear sites in Iran. But I loved how this book has, at the beginning, the book's epigram is a quote from Donald Trump in 1990, in which he says, "I've always thought about the issue of nuclear war. It's a very important element in my thought process. It's the ultimate catastrophe, the biggest problem this world has, and nobody's focused on the nuts and bolts of it. It's a little like sickness. People don't believe they're going to get sick until they do. Nobody wants to talk about it. I believe that the greatest of all stupidities is people's believing it will never happen, because everyone knows how destructive it will be, so no one will use the nuclear weapons. What bullshit." In other words, he saw through this back in 1990, that MAD is not an effective deterrent to prevent it from happening, okay? So young Trump did not fall for the fallacy that MAD is an effective deterrent. And it can be encapsulated by saying the worst is now possible, so therefore it won't happen. Trump saw that that's total bullcrap. In fact, we can now see that it is inevitable. This is how the world ends. That's the first thing that happened that ushered in the apocalyptic era, is that we now understand the escalation to the extremes of total war. And then, of course, the second really apocalyptic turn was the nuclear weapons. So not only were we in an era where we understood that total war would win, we joined an era where nuclear war would assure that we had now finally the means to wipe ourselves out. And so, I began reading this book the night that President Trump directed the strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear enrichment sites to prevent them from having the means of making their first attack, okay? That's kind of the first important thing, okay? But so let me show you then what Trump did here that is just masterful. Trump, instead of looking this as a one-dimensional thing where it's past moving into the future, as you would in occurring time, where it's just all causal, the past causes the future, what Trump did is he used a counterfactual thing, and he began with what does our peace look like? What peace do we really want to have? When Iran attacked, we had a choice. We could yield or we could retaliate. Retaliating would mean escalating, okay? And in a nuclear world, what would happen is you'd have mutually assured destruction, and the loss would be so great to each of us, it would be incalculable. It would be a terrible double loss. And this, by the way, if you're like, this is the crystal ball effect. And the crystal ball effect believes inevitably that this is how it will end. And it believes in this concept of the inevitability of the double loss. So we want to, the truth of the matter is, that's correct. And I'm not going to get into the power over the past and the idea that our future is now fixed. And the whole point now is to delay Armageddon for as long as possible. And this is why you start hearing this wonderful message about that appeals to the Iranians. And so what Trump did is he figured out that there's another branch of this tree, which is to let Iran retaliate, but then instead of us retaliating to it and escalating, we were allowed to retaliate, save face, and then we were able to de-escalate. In so doing, we got a plus out of it. We got one, and they got a one out of it. And we achieved a peace. We have achieved a ceasefire, I should say. The peace is still very much in a tenuous situation. But instead of looking at it as left to right, I would like to be able to put this board on this and then show you that what Trump showed us was a way out that was an upward way, a Christian way, which is, listen, how do we put down these swords? How do we solve this issue? And of course, that can really only come once we have killed all the people that are preventing us to have from having the peace that we want and that we are willing to fight for. And that's why it became very, very important that we were not going to allow them the capacity to attack us with nuclear weapons, because they showed very, very clearly that they're rotten scumbags that just launch ballistic missiles into residences, into neighborhoods. They're trying to terrorize rather than eliminate military targets. And that's barbaric. And the Iranian people are far better than that. But this regime that runs them are, it's like the Saudi prince said, the Ayatollah is the new Hitler today. And the world would be really glad to get rid of them. But here's the thing. Who should get rid of them? Should we make the same mistake that we made when we committed forces to oust Saddam Hussein from Kuwait, but then did not allow Schwarzkopf to march on Baghdad and eliminate the regime that we had to go back and do 22 years later instead? No, I guess it wasn't that long. 12 years later. Or, are we about to make that same mistake now by leaving the Ayatollah there? Or is it, but let's begin with the end in mind. Who is it better that the Ayatollah get deposed by? It's better that he's eliminated by his own people. And because then it doesn't look like we are, the ones that are causing the regime change. Anyone who knows anything about Iran knows that the United States has missed many opportunities to fund the green revolutionaries in Iran that very much showed how Western the emerging generations are there in Iran. If you're not aware of why Iran why there's such great potential for real lasting peace with Iran, is to understand that the Ayatollah undid Iran when they started sending their best and brightest kids over to Western universities for education. He thought that in so doing, he could steal the education of the West for Iran. But what ended up happening is the old line that if you send your kids to Caesar for education, do not be surprised when they come back as Romans. And so the Ayatollah sent his kids to the West for education, and they came back as Westerners. And so they do not like this Islamic fundamentalism. They are not Islamists. Okay, of course there is always a certain sector of people in any society where young, alienated, and angry kids are willing to throw their latent enthusiasm into any violent cause. And so there will always be low-hanging fruit for radicals to pick. And that's why, again, going back to the Christian answer, we need to get to those fruit before the radicals do. And we certainly need to not keep creating more of that kind of fruit because we are feeding the poisonous tree. Instead, we need to bring we got to do a better job of, like Machiavelli said, our enemies, they are to be caressed or exterminated. And we're not doing a good enough job of caressing our enemies. I know that sounds weird, and believe me, I'm not saying that we need to start bribing. All this foreign aid is it's very, very wasteful. And frankly, it actually fosters contempt of us when we do it the way that we do it, because it so rarely falls into the right people's hands. It usually falls into and that's the thing about socialism, is that in socialism, the worst people get on top. Not that our elected system hasn't shown that awful lot of people do seize the reins of power. At least we can vote the bums out. And can you imagine where we'd be today if oh gosh. So listen, I'm not Trump's greatest fan. I'm a Reaganite, but I'm a huge believer that Trump is getting it, and he's a lot of times his behavior is still very brash. I still think he's the world's biggest troll. I think that's just part of his tactics, is that he's always constantly going to do things that are going to bait the left into behaving like themselves. He really learned the second rule of politics very well, which is when your enemies are making asses of themselves, don't interrupt. And so he's constantly giving them opportunities to show just how un-American they really are. Just the idea that Mexican flags would be waved here out of pride. Well, if you're so proud of your country, go back to it, okay? We have rules here. But when you are being coddled and you're being supported and reinforced by a left that has developed Western self-contempt. This is a fantastic book. This book is such a great book. And it'll explain to you why the left now hates America. And they hate America even more. You know why? Because they voted for Donald Trump 3 times. We're headed towards a new dawn here. And we have lots of options because Ronald Reagan put all of his weight behind SDI. It's like Gorbachev demanding that Reagan give up his SDI plans. And it could happen. This changes the game for us to be able to defend ourselves. And so we need to do everything we can. We also need to make sure that we don't run out of missiles.